If you loved Italy and you loved Greece, you're going to love today's destination. Welcome to Vacation Mavens, the podcast that brings you travel inspiration and practical tips from two moms who know how to plan the perfect trip. I'm Tamara from Your Time to Fly. And I'm Kim from Stuffed Suitcase. With over 40 years of travel experience between us, we're here to share our favorite destinations from road trips to cruising, theme parks, and European adventures. Whether you're planning a family vacation or a mom getaway, we have the tips and tricks to make memories that will last a lifetime. So, Tamara, one of your big end of summer trips with Glenn was to Croatia, which is a European country that I think has really flown to the top of a lot of people's European bucket list trip destinations lately, especially when I saw some of those blue water pictures you'd shared. So, why don't you talk about maybe why you picked Croatia and how you got there, just to start us off, and then we'll get into a little bit of itinerary and things you did? Yeah, we were looking for something that had that mix of relaxation, but also had some good food, obviously some wine, as Glenn just got his WSET level 3. So he's like very
Yeah,
learning
really
about
good.
wine, and also had some history and some of that charm, like the reason that you would go to Europe. And so we really loved when we went to Greece, and we've had a great time the different times in Italy. So I wanted to try something new. And Croatia is right across the Adriatic from Italy. For people that don't know, it used to be part of Yugoslavia. And so after the war in the 90s, it split up into there's Bosnia and Serbia and Montenegro and Croatia. But Croatia is part of the EU.
Oh,
And
that's nice. Okay.
surprisingly, it's actually, you'll be interested in this, at least according to our tour guides, it is the second most safest or second
Oh,
safest country to visit
ooh,
behind Iceland.
oh, nice.
Yeah, which I always heard like how Iceland was, but I will say you really do see it is such a lovely country to visit because yeah, I feel like this is what I said when I talked about Japan, but it's really clean. People just take a lot of care in that.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, like, how do they accomplish this? Because clearly something is just different as a society. Like, you can't, as a culture, too, you can't just have a program in place, but you don't find litter or graffiti. There's no panhandlers. There weren't even any like unhoused people that we came across, or people like the guys that sell like the knockoff
Yeah.
bags or like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
None of that. Our last day of the trip, we actually had ended up flying out of Venice. And so we spent one day in Trieste, Italy. And we parked, we walked like a few feet, and I was like, oh, we're in Italy now.
Oh,
Like, let's look
wow.
around. I love Italy, but you could totally see like a difference.
Yeah.
So it is like for anyone that has like concerns, oh, like my mother was like, is that safe? And I'm like, yes, it is very safe. It's a very safe, very clean, very lovely country to visit,
That's
very
awesome.
friendly people. And I'm going to tell you another thing now before we really get into it, because your girls might be interested in this too. But they have really tall people in Croatia,
Oh, nice.
especially in the southern part of the country in Dalmatia. Like the men, the average height I think is 6'2",
Holy smokes.
and I didn't feel particularly. I'm 5'6", which
Mhm.
is I feel average, but it's actually taller for a US average.
Okay.
You're a lot taller, so you would
Yeah.
fit right in.
Yeah.
But it 5'6", I didn't feel short necessarily. There are plenty of like women taller than me, but the men, oh my goodness, like you were like
Wow.
just so many tall men. Glenn is 6 foot and he felt short. And I have
Okay.
a picture next to him next to one of our guides, and he just looks like a child.
That's
It's really
funny.
funny.
That's
So
hilarious.
anyway, that's cool. If you want to go look at tall men, you can also go
Yeah.
there.
No, that sounds good. I'll mention it to my girls. I know there's one thing also that when you were saying, like, how do they keep everything so clean that Iceland and Croatia might have in common? And that is the price of stuff. Cause I remember you saying that it was surprisingly expensive, which I think I, for one, was not expecting you to say that about
Yes.
Croatia.
Yeah. I think because it is not as high on the radar as like Greece or Italy, there's an expectation that is the cheaper version of that. And that is not true. I did put together a post on We3 Travel that has like the breakdown, which granted, look, we were going there in a celebratory kind of mood. We were wanting to really enjoy it. But even still, there were a lot of hotels that were way out of anything that I would want to spend. And this is with me splurging.
Yeah.
So you could,
Cause I know what
there
your hotel prices sometimes are.
there are hostels, there are definitely like like guest houses or apartments, definitely tons of Airbnb, VRBO kind of thing. But a lot of those are in the old town. And the downside that I will say about that is that these old towns are pedestrian only, they're cobblestones, and there's a lot of stairs. When you're traveling, unless you're traveling light, you're dragging a bag like across that or up the stairs into these little places. I don't know if all of them have air conditioning, like all of that. So it's something to think about for sure. We can get into a little bit of like where I stayed, but it is surprisingly expensive, like, even the food, like,
Yeah.
the cheapest meals that we had were when we would get, like, pizza, and if you could share, like, 1 pizza, which are generally meant for 1 person, then a pizza was, like, 15 euros, so that would
Okay.
be like, "Okay, we can have an affordable, like, lunch or whatever," but
Okay.
so many of the meals were just really pricey.
Yeah.
So,
30 to 50 € a person type thing for just
for an
standard
entree.
for yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
so if you wanna then add a drink
Drinks and
over an
appetizer. Yep.
appetizer, yeah. I mean, you could easily be $100 a person.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah, but not everywhere. Istria was definitely, more affordable. We went to one place in Istria where we had lunch at a local it's like Konobo. That's
Mhm.
like your taverna, like, it's like a more family-run, like, smaller, like, less fancy kinda place. So those are a little bit more affordable. We actually had 2 truffle dishes plus an entree, and I think Glenn had maybe a glass. He probably had a glass of wine, and it was like 50 € for that, so that
Okay.
was surprisingly
Yeah,
cheap
that's a good deal.
because
Yeah.
everything else is more, but yeah.
Okay. Let's dig into your itinerary a bit because I know that you're going to have amazing blog posts that will help really tell people, but we'll just do a high level. So, first of all, like, where did you fly into? And then, did you rent a car? And then, what did your itinerary look like?
Yeah, so logistically, it Croatia is a long, skinny country, and there's not really a great train system. So you can either fly into one end of the country and fly out of the other end of the country, or you can always, like, if it's cheaper for you to just get a round trip from the same city, you can find like a cheap, inexpensive, like Ryanair kind of flight, like down to your arrival city. But it takes a long time to drive up and down. So what we decided to do was we flew into Dubrovnik and to get there are some direct flights from the US to Dubrovnik, but from Boston, we went to Amsterdam, connected Amsterdam to Dubrovnik. And that was all fine. Like, we got in like around 1 p.m., nice time to arrive. We ended up flying out of Venice because when we were up, we finished our trip in the northern part of the country. And it was an equidistant drive to Zagreb, which is the capital of Croatia, where we could fly out of, or Venice. And just looking at the flights and like what the layovers would mean if we went from Zagreb, I was like, it makes more sense for us to fly out of Venice. Let me tell you, don't do that. Because while it was great to have that one night in Italy and it
Mhm.
was the same drive to get to Venice, everything was fine. What happened, what I didn't realize until after I booked the flights, is that it is extremely expensive to drop off a car in Italy that you've rented in Croatia.
Oh,
So even though you're probably always gonna get dinged with a one-way drop off if you picked up somewhere and dropped off in another place,
yeah.
it was most companies wouldn't even offer it. I finally found Enterprise to do it, and I think it was a $600 penalty, and I
Mm.
think the cost of the rental was only $300.
Wow. And there
Something
wasn't
like
like a
that.
train or something where you could just go
You could
from
take, like, a ferry, but
oh, yeah.
it would have been yeah, it would have been logistically, like, challenging, and then if you did a private driver of some sort, it would have been, like, just the same cost, so whatever, I just said, "Lesson learned." I always
Yeah.
tell everybody,
Yeah.
but so generally, it would make sense if you could fly into Dubrovnik, fly out of Zagreb. You can also fly into the town of Split. So what we tried to do was the first half of our itinerary, we spent 12 nights in Croatia, 1 night in Italy, and we for the first half of our trip, we didn't rent a car because basically we were in Dubrovnik. We did 3 nights in Dubrovnik, 1 night on the island of Korcula, so we took a ferry there. 3 nights on the island of Hvar, and that was took a ferry there, and then we took a ferry back to the mainland to this town of Split, and that's where we picked up a car. So when you're on the islands, like it can be nice to have a car to see more of the island, but parking is a nightmare. And
Hmm.
parking like by Dubrovnik would be a nightmare. So we figured we're going to be car free until we need it. And then we, from Split, drove up to Zadar and then Istria. We spent one night in Zadar, which is the kind of the top part of the Dalmatian coast, and then 4 nights in Istria. Istria is the peninsula that is adjacent to Italy and Slovenia, and it has the qualities that are most similar to Italy in that there's a lot of wineries there. It's known for truffles, so
Okay.
and the medieval walled cities and things like that.
Nice. Sounds nice. It sounds logistically like you definitely know what you're doing, but not having the trains and renting the car, it puts an extra fly in the ointment of how to plan that on what you want to
Yeah,
do, right?
I think that's why some people will just do 1 week in Croatia,
Okay.
and they'll either fly into Dubrovnik or Split, and then they'll do that city, they'll go to the islands, and then maybe do the other city, and then take a bus back to Dubrovnik or something like
Yeah.
that and fly out. So they keep it, and honestly, a lot of people, when they do Croatia, they'll do either a cruise. There are tons of there are big ship cruises, but there are tons of these smaller, like, cruise Croatia. They're basically like 30-person yachts
Oh, okay.
that you can join as a cruise. So it's not like you need to charter the whole thing. And other people do charter like a sailboat or sailing yacht of some sort. So it's a huge boating and yachting destination.
Okay.
So a lot of people like to explore the coast and the islands that way. I looked into that and I couldn't find, because we also wanted to do Istria, I couldn't find quite the itinerary that I wanted. And I wasn't quite sure, even with that kind of smaller ship environment, if I wanted that environment for
Yeah.
this trip. So we decided to do it like on our own. But that is another way to visit Croatia. And like I said, a lot of people will just take 1 week and do that southern part. And it's awesome.
Okay.
Like that's great. It's almost like two different trips. Like you can do
Oh, that's cool.
the Dalmatian coast and islands,
Yep.
or you can do Istria, which is a little bit,
Different feel.
yeah.
Yeah. So I know you're always big on where you're staying, and it sounds like you maybe splurged a bit on this trip. So do you want to highlight any properties where you stayed that you thought were just really cool and you appreciated what they added to your trip?
Sure. So we did the first 3 nights were in Dubrovnik, and we stayed at a place called the Rixos Premium. And this was a place where Dubrovnik is ridiculously expensive. So I was looking at like the luxury properties, and those were over $1,000 a night. And I'm like,
Yeah.
nope, not doing that. You can save money by staying in a nearby town of Kavtat, and that you can take like a water taxi or something to town. But I didn't want that hassle. I wanted to be within walking distance, but I also knew I wanted a little bit of relaxation time. So I really didn't want to stay in the old city. I wanted to stay where I could have a pool or access to a beach, but then easily walk to the old city. So what I found was this Rixos. It's fairly large hotel. It is like a luxury property, but it's not like ultra luxury. It's about a 20-minute walk north of the old town. And they had restaurants and bars, but they had a big pool area. I booked it through American Express. It's, I believe,
Right.
part of the Fine Hotels and
Okay.
Resorts. And so when you do that, with the platinum card, you get the 5 times points, but you also get like some perks. And so one of those was an upgraded room, and one was $100 resort credit. So we actually took our $100 resort credit and we used that to rent a cabana one day, which was really just like a sunbed,
Okay.
but it was like on the water. And that way we had a reserved, comfortable place to sit for like because we wanted one day of kind of relaxation.
Oh, that's
And so
nice.
we could use the pool, or you could walk down the steps to the water there, which is a little rough. I went in once and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not a good enough swimmer. So that worked out fine. Like it was good. It wasn't, I'm not going to go, oh, that was the best hotel ever. But for what we wanted, it worked out fine. If you wanted to be a little closer to town, like the same price point, but there is like a Hilton Excelsior or something like that. It looks like a historic property. It's not like a
Oh,
high rise Hilton.
okay.
It looks really nice and it's right outside of town. So that would be another good option for people that are maybe looking to use points or something too.
Okay. Good to
And
know.
then
Did
we
you feel like
went,
3 days in Dubrovnik was good? What sort of
yeah, I
highlights did you
do.
guys do there?
I think
Sorry, I'll
that
switch
if,
on. We'll just go. I know you asked about places, but I think we need to
yeah,
talk about Dubrovnik a bit.
sure. So I think 3 nights was really good. I think you could add another night if you wanted to do a day trip. Like sometimes people will do a day trip down to Montenegro. I really want to go to Montenegro,
Hmm.
but I've heard that in the summer it can be like 2 hours at the border because they're not part of the EU. And so I don't want to waste half my day trip like sitting at a border crossing. So I'll just do that separately. So some people will do that or they'll do a day trip to Bosnia or they will do a day trip to what we did as our transfer to Korcula, which was I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, but the Peljasak Peninsula, which is
Okay.
known for wine and oysters and salt farms and things like that. So I would say you definitely want to tour Old Town. We did a Game of Thrones tour because
Right.
if you don't know, like Game of Thrones, like King's Landing was mostly filmed in Dubrovnik. So we were super into that. But then honestly, I didn't think the tour was like, it's not that the tour wasn't great. I just think I don't know if too much time has passed or maybe because I visited other destinations that
Like
have,
Northern Ireland.
yeah, exactly, that were a little bit more interactive and stuff. The guy brought out like swords for us to play and he had the Lannister banner because that's King's Landing. But it was,
I was like, Lannister, no.
I know. At first, we're like, "Why?" And he's just there still.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, okay, okay. So we got to go into some places that I would have wanted to visit anyway. He had pointed out some things to us, but I would have wanted a little bit more just general history of Croatia and Dubrovnik,
Yeah.
especially because the more time that I interacted with people, the more I also wanted to understand like the impacts of the war in the 90s. And just, I don't
Oh,
know,
right.
there was more that I wanted to learn. So I would maybe just book a standard walking tour.
Okay.
But if you're really into Game of Thrones, which I am, there's plenty of those options.
Yeah.
Also, what a lot of people do is walk the city walls. So it
Yeah.
has these medieval walls around the city. There are two gates where you can enter and walk those. So, one other thing just to point out with going to Croatia, we were there at the end of August
Yep.
and early September, and it was still really hot. Like it was
Uh,
over 90 most of the days that we were there and really humid. Like the humidity surprised me. So,
Especially with it being coastal, right? It's like
yeah,
it just
yeah.
socks in there. It's not breezy. It just
In
settles.
those old cities in the walls
Yeah.
with the narrow streets where the
Ugh.
breeze can't really get through,
Oh,
like, sitting and having dinner at night, I'm like, "I have to go back and take a shower." You're just
yeah.
like, you're sweating. So anyway, you wanna get out there early if you're gonna walk the walls, you wanna get
Okay.
out there and do that in the early morning because there's no shade, it's a lot of
Yeah.
sun. Glenn had a little bit of an issue. We went up to one of the forts, and he got some of his vertigo,
Oh,
with
yeah.
his
Yep. The
heights,
heights. Yeah.
so we realized that he would not be able to walk the walls with me.
I got you.
And so I was gonna get up early and do it another day, but then I had walked 20,000 steps the day before. We had been up, like, at 5:45. It was the day after too, just getting over jet lag and that lack of sleep and just everything with my body right now. My body
Yeah.
was, like, not doing it. So
Yeah.
I didn't actually walk the walls, which is fine.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did do that we absolutely loved was the first night we did a private sunset tour. So there's tons of different boat options in all of these areas. And you definitely want to get out on the water, at least at a couple points when you're going
Yeah.
to Croatia. And it was not crazy expensive. I think it was around €200 for us to do a private on like a smaller boat. He had wine for us, played music, took us around for an hour and a half at sunset.
Nice.
I thought it was so worth it. Because sometimes you see these like kind of the party boats that go out and they're packed with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want
Key
that
West.
vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really lovely.
Okay.
And
Nice.
Croatia has beautiful sunsets. So I would totally recommend that. We did also do a food tour, but I will honestly say it was not my favorite food tour that I've ever done because we did two sit down times where it was like we were sitting there for like kind of a long time eating. Like the second place was you had a salad and then they had one of the famous dishes around there is a black risotto and the other was like a wild boar ragu on a fettuccine or something like that. And because the food is going to feel really similar to Italian.
Okay.
A lot of fresh seafood, but then a lot of Italian-ish kind of pasta and risotto and that kind of thing. And I just felt, gosh, can we get up and move? I
Yeah.
felt like we were just sitting so long. And sometimes you're there and you're like, if you're not clicking with the people or whatever.
Yeah.
So Then we went to this wine shop where it was like really crowded. And even though we were there for like our little private tasting, other people were coming in just to shop for the wine and we're just like trying to move out of the way. And then we went to a gelato place to finish. So it was okay. I think there is like this cooking thing that I might have wanted to do if I did something different.
Okay.
But I think it's also just nice to take some time to relax and just enjoy it. And which I try to do. I'm very much a go vacationer sometimes. And I really appreciated that this time I built in a little relaxation at each
Yeah,
bar stop.
that's good. Do you want to give us, since we're going a little long, do you want to give us a couple of high levels for the other, because you still have a week left if you were just in
Yeah.
Dubrovnik for 3 days, of the
Yeah.
other spots you went and anything that really stood out, either where you stayed or things you did in the other stops?
Definitely. So the one thing I will say is if you do a day trip to the peninsula, we had this amazing experience. We had a driver take us up there. We visited the town of Stone, which is known for these as the biggest like fortified stone wall next to the wall of China or something like that. But it was what we did that I really loved was that we went out on a boat with an oyster farmer and he showed us kind of the whole oyster farming experience. He shucked oysters for us right there. And then on the boat, him and his wife served us like a lunch of mussels and oysters and cheese and wine. It was just so lovely and it was beautiful out on the water. We saw dolphins. It was just really great. And then we went and did like a wine tasting. And then we, from there, took a ferry over to, that was great. I would highly recommend it, even if you do just a day trip from Dubrovnik. Korcula is one of the smaller, it's not really small, but it's one of the islands. Hvar is like the big, well known, all the Americans, most of the Europeans go to. It's like the
Mhm.
party island. It's more like the Mykonos of Croatia.
Ibiza. Yeah.
Yeah. And while Korčula is a little bit quieter, a little bit not as well, not known, like it not as popular, but it's getting there, which is go there now before it gets
Yeah.
banned. Because they're building, we drove past one time, they're building a new port, and we're like, why are they building a new port? And the taxi driver's, oh, so like bigger cruise ships can come. And I'm like, you want that? Why? It's already
Talk to your
crowded. Like,
neighbors. Talk to your neighbors that are a little further west. They're going to tell you not to do that.
yeah. So anyway, it was we had a really nice time. I really loved the old town of Korčula. I would definitely say if you even if you just stayed on Hvar and then did a day trip to Korčula, like definitely go visit. One of the things we did that afternoon, we stayed one day, but then late afternoon we took the ferry over to Hvar, so we had one full day in Korčula and we did a little walking tour in the morning. And I just love it in the evening too, if you do get to stay there. But then in the afternoon, we went over to a beach club called Labanya Beach Club.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just like where you rent the sun loungers, they bring you drinks, there's music, that's pretty water.
There was a
There's
water polo contest going on, right? Is that where that was?
not, that wasn't there, but
Oh, okay.
every place, like where we're staying by the Rixos, and I feel like one other place, like I saw, like water polo is definitely really big
I would
there
not mind watching
in the open water.
I would not
you know?
mind watching some water polo, the sport, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
Wink, wink.
It was very popular.
Yeah,
For
sure.
sure. No, it was the place you may have seen on Instagram, like where there's like the swing in the
Oh,
water.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I
Yeah,
remember
so
you there. Yeah.
one of those
Okay.
kind of places. So that was really nice. And then Var, it was just I loved, and so we stayed at a place called Hotel Korčula. It was fine. The location was wonderful. It was very historic. It needs some updating. Fine. It was one night.
Yeah.
Then when we were in Var, again, it was one of those destinations where the luxury hotels are just like out of my price range. And I wanted to stay in town so that the ferry port would be very accessible. We could walk to all the restaurants. I didn't want to have to worry about transportation. So we stayed at a boutique hotel called the Beach Bay Var Hotel, and it was awesome.
Oh,
It was
nice.
new, so it had like that like modern, fresh, beachy feel to it. It reminded me in some ways of the place that we stayed on Naxos. Just like a nice
Yeah.
aesthetic, not huge. It was literally a 2-minute walk from the ferry port, but it was on like the quieter side of town and we were overlooking a harbor. There was a little rocky beach, like just a couple minutes, like not a couple feet, like from the hotel. And the hotel didn't have a pool, but they had all these sun loungers. So you could just grab a sun lounger in the morning. And then when you were hot, which is often, you walk to the beach and you cool off there. So I liked it a lot. They had a really nice breakfast. It was lovely. Room wasn't huge, but we had a nice balcony overlooking the water. And like I said, nice style, very modern, very nice. So I definitely liked that. And Hvar is like a lot of people do like boat tours. They have like island hopping tours, and there's
Mhm.
like Blue Cave, like the Blue Grotto and
Yeah.
Capri and stuff like that. And it was, so we ended up not, we couldn't decide. There's so many boat options. We couldn't decide what we wanted because we would see them, we'd walk by them in the harbor and we're like, we don't want to be on that thing. That looks terrible. Like it's enclosed and it's packed with people. It's a fine one that you wanted, and then the cost of the private ones was like, "Well, I'm not spending that." So we took one day where we rented a car just for the day. It was like a beater car that we stick shift, air conditioning barely working, that we drove around the island. But it was nice to see because it's a really big island. So it was nice to see more of the island. And there were a couple other towns that are very quiet, like very pretty, very nice. But if you didn't want to stay in that like hustle bustle of Var town, like you could stay at other places on the island, but then you're going to need a car to get around more. Or I guess you could take a water taxi. So we did that. We did like a wine tasting. We stopped at a sandy beach and changed our clothes in the car and went swimming. Like it was
Yeah.
a fun day. But then the other day we ended up just hanging at the hotel, relaxing, swimming, just chilling. And then in the evening, we would just have dinner in town. And town, it's like bustling. There's all these little, most of these towns like Dubrovnik, Korcula, Hvar, it's like narrow little streets, a lot of steps because of how they're built. Bars spill out onto the steps where people are almost sitting on like cushions or little low chairs, all kinds of the restaurants there are insides, but most of the time people are eating like outside on the sidewalks, which is nice, except it can be really hot. They really need some like overhead fans or something going on. But it was lovely. I really loved it. And then so that kind of wraps up like our islands.
Yep.
And then we took a ferry over to Split. Split is like a larger city, but it's known for Diocletian's palace, which Diocletian was a emperor of Rome that had been from Croatia. I don't remember what the date was, but basically he's the only emperor that like, retired, and he built himself this palace as his retirement palace. And today it's not all still there, but basically like the city and town have grown up around it. So like the shops and the houses and things are part of this complex. So you can go down. We took a tour with a really good tour guide that kind of showed us some of the lower levels and then different highlights throughout the town. I would definitely recommend doing that because I don't think you're going to understand it in the same way without a tour.
Okay.
But we decided not to stay in Split. Split's a very popular place for people to
Yeah.
use as a home base. But a couple of things, like I had heard mixed things about it beforehand, but even our tour guide said that Split has become a place where young Europeans come to party. And so on the weekends, especially, but in the evenings, like people are out getting drunk and then they're
Oh,
like
yeah.
being loud or like
Yeah.
whatever. And it just, we decided we only had limited time. We were going to go to Istria afterwards, which is like a 5-hour drive from Split. So I was like, you know what? Let's just stay a little bit further up the coast at a quieter place, see something else, and then go from there. So we did our day in Split, picked up a car at the airport, and then we drove up to Zadar, which is definitely worth a visit. Zadar is it's a small town, really well known for their sunsets. They have this really unique thing called the sea organ, which
Oh, yeah.
basically
Yeah, I
when
saw
the
that on your
waves come
stories. Yep.
in, it plays music of like sounds. I would say it sounds
Yeah.
more like whales,
Yeah.
like
Whale sounds. That's what I thought.
yeah.
Yeah. That was really
And it's
cool.
another place where people do like dolphin tours or different boat tours, snorkeling, like all that kind of stuff. So we spent one night there at a place called the Hotel Bastion, which was a Relais Chateau property, but it was not that exciting. Service was amazing, but
Okay.
it was
Yeah.
more location than anything
Yeah.
else
Yep.
because it was just one night. And then I'm just babbling on.
That's okay. I know you're going to have a lot of great blog posts to go with this, but why don't you wrap us up just with some final tips or thoughts about if anyone's thinking of Croatia for their next trip, what they should consider, or any final tips?
Absolutely. I will just add one thing that I didn't mention, which was our stay in Istria. We stayed at the Meneghetti wine hotel, and it was definitely the highlight of our trip. It was an amazing resort with pools and a spa and restaurant and a beach club and tennis and bikes and like all of that. But you were staying like in the vines. It was so lovely. Really loved it. I will definitely link to different things in the show notes, including my itinerary for couples, which is on your time to fly.
But Istria is wonderful if you are going to be interested in wine, truffles, truffle hunting, and also just relaxing. And there's some really great towns to see there as well, Revenge and Pula, where there's like a Roman arena that looks like the Colosseum. So like really there's so many different like Roman ruins and a lot of Venetian influences too, all throughout Croatia. It's really fun to see. But yeah, so some tips. We'd already talked about how expensive it can be
Hmm.
and how hot it can be. The other thing I would say, definitely, if you're going to go in the water, you really need to bring water shoes
Oh,
because
yeah.
all of the beaches are rock. And so that's a must. I know that going into it, plus just that's how Italy is. Some of Greece is. So anyway, that is a must. Also, especially in Dubrovnik and other places, cabs are really expensive. It's actually cheaper to do Uber. And for our airport transfer, I just use Welcome Pickup because I've
Right.
done that multiple times and they are fabulous. And then they don't have to worry about it. And if you're flying out of Dubrovnik, like definitely pay attention to when it is a cruise ship day because we flew in on a Sunday and it seems or we arrived on a Sunday. If you arrived on a Saturday, that seems like a day where it was like 2 hours to get to the airport because there's one road and it just takes forever. And definitely what in all of these places, I would say check the cruise ship schedule so that maybe you want to schedule your tours when there aren't as many cruise ships
Yeah.
in insight. Like we had our it was fine for us in Dubrovnik. It was crowded, but not crazy. It was definitely not like when I've been in Venice. But I think when we were there, it was maybe I know I saw like a large Windstar sailing yacht out in the water. The main cruise port you can't see from Old Town. But when we drove out the next day, I saw there were like two ships in town. But I think it can go up to 6 or 8. So
Wow.
it can make a big difference.
Yeah,
I've
for
heard
sure.
horror stories from people, especially in Dubrovnik. So it's definitely something that you want to, for the heat and other reasons, maybe
Yeah.
have some downtime in the middle of the day and then do your activities like early or late.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. And for people that don't know, there are websites. I don't remember there's a couple of main ones, but that allow you to see the ports of call, what ships will be in on what dates. So you could probably do a simple search for that and figure that out. But great.
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
like it
So
was an amazing trip for you guys.
I'm sorry that I went long, but it was a lot to cover. It's a
Yeah.
great trip. I have one post on We Three Travel that kind of goes through the budget breakdown. And then I have one post on Your Time to Fly right now that gives our whole itinerary and lots of these kind of little tips and stuff too.
Nice. Thanks so much for sharing. And everyone, stay tuned because next up is going to be my trip to Orlando. So, those of you that are loving Europe probably love this episode. And those that are more into the domestic theme park stuff, stay tuned.
Talk to you next time.